Have you ever wondered how a completely barren rock eventually becomes a lush, thriving forest? Well, to understand that, we actually have to start small, really small. Today, we're going on a fascinating journey in this explainer to completely demystify the complex, deeply interconnected web of life. It's so easy to look at a landscape and just see, trees and animals. But right beneath the surface is this incredibly intricate system of rules, relationships, and energy transfers that literally keeps our planet thriving.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The basics of environment. 2. How organisms interact. 3. Flowing energy and food chains. 4. Ecological pyramids and productivity. And 5. Ecosystem change and succession.
Starting with Section 1, the basics of environment. This is the absolute foundation of any ecosystem.
So, to make sense of any environment, we basically have to split it into two main buckets. On one side, we have the biotic factors. This is the living cast of characters. We're talking humans, animals, plants, right down to the microscopic bacteria in the soil. Then on the other side, we have the abiotic factors. Think of these as the physical and chemical stage that those living actors actually perform on. Sunlight, temperature, soil composition, water, all that non-living stuff. The interplay between the living actors and their non-living stage dictates absolutely everything about how an ecosystem functions. I mean, it's exactly why you can't grow a tropical palm tree in the freezing Arctic. Now, how does life actually respond to those abiotic factors, specifically things like temperature? Well, nature's come up with two very different survival strategies here. First, you've got your eurythermal organisms. These are the generalists. They are tough, and they can tolerate massive temperature swings, making them highly adaptable to changing seasons. Then, on the flip side, you have stenothermal organisms. These guys are the specialists. Their biology is incredibly delicate, meaning they require perfectly stable conditions and can only handle a very narrow range of temperatures to survive.
So, the crucial point is, what happens when those abiotic factors are just brutal? Well, organisms adapt. Take a look at xerophytes, for example. These are plants adapted to extremely dry environments, like deserts. To survive without much water, they develop these incredible modifications. Their stomata, which are the tiny pores they use to breathe, are actually hidden away on the lower surface or literally sunken into little pits just to stop water from evaporating. They develop a thick, waxy cuticle on their leaves to seal moisture in. They grow these incredibly long, branched roots to hunt for deep groundwater. Some even ditch leaves entirely. They just rely purely on thick, fleshy stems to store water and perform photosynthesis.
When you put a heavily armored xerophyte, like a cactus, right next to a hydrophyte, like a lotus, it's literally evolution staring you in the face. I mean, the lotus doesn't need sunken stomata or massive root systems because it literally lives in the water. It has poorly developed roots and places its stomata right on the upper surface of its broad leaves. The environment completely shapes the organism. Moving right along to Section 2, how organisms interact. In nature, nobody exists in a vacuum, right? These interactions are basically biological transactions, and we can easily chart who benefits with a plus sign, who is harmed with a minus sign, and who is completely unaffected with a 0. Look at mutualism, a perfect win-win where both species benefit, like fungi and algae teaming up to form lichens. Then there's commensalism, where one benefits and the other honestly doesn't care, like an orchid hitching a free ride on a mango branch while the tree doesn't even notice. Predation is your classic plus-minus. The eagle gets a meal and the rabbit, well, does it. Amensalism is fascinating, though. One is harmed while the other is unaffected, like a fungus secreting chemicals that just happen to wipe out nearby bacteria. And finally, competition, where fighting for the exact same limited resources actually puts a strain on both species involved. Speaking of those plus-minus interactions, we absolutely have to talk about parasitism. Parasites are the ultimate freeloaders, biologically dependent on a host for nutrition. But they pull this off in a few distinct ways. Ectoparasites live right on the external surface. Think lice on humans or ticks on a dog. Endoparasites are a bit more insidious. They live deep inside the host's body, like liver flukes. And then there is the incredibly clever brood parasitism. Some birds won't even build their own nests. They just sneak their eggs into the nest of another species, literally tricking the host bird into incubating and raising their young. Wild, right? All right, Section 3, flowing energy and food chains. To really grasp how energy flows, we need to understand the sheer scale of ecology. We are stepping up the ladder of life here. We start with a single organism. A group of those makes a population. Different populations interacting make a community. Add in the non-living abiotic factors, and boom, you have an ecosystem. Group similar ecosystems together, and you get a massive biome, like a desert or a rainforest. And put all those biomes together, and you have the biosphere, our entire living planet.
But as we look at these massive, incredibly complex biomes, a pretty critical question pops up. Where does all this energy actually begin its journey?
Well, energy flows through distinct pathways, and it really depends on the ecosystem. You know the one we all learned in grade school, the grazing food chain? This always starts with live plants, the producers, harnessing the sun. Grass feeds the grasshopper, which feeds the rat, the snake, and eventually the eagle. But here is a super surprising fact. In terrestrial ecosystems, the detritus food chain is actually the dominant one. It completely bypasses living plants and starts its energy flow from dead organic matter, breaking down fallen leaves and returning nutrients to the soil. And finally, there's the parasitic food chain, where energy transfers in reverse, from larger organisms down to smaller ones, slowly siphoning energy without immediately killing the host.
Next up, Section 4, Ecological Pyramids and Productivity. This brings us to a huge aha moment in ecology: ecological pyramids. Normally, you expect an upright pyramid of numbers, right? Typical of a grassland. You have millions of blades of grass at the bottom, supporting a smaller number of herbivores, supporting even fewer predators at the top. But look at the inverted pyramid. If you have a single massive tree acting as the producer, it can support thousands of herbivorous insects, which in turn support even more parasites and hyperparasites. The result is a totally inverted pyramid of numbers. It flips our traditional expectations completely upside down. We also measure these systems by their productivity, which is basically how fast they can generate new biomass in a specific area. Now, you might assume the vast oceans would be the most productive just because they are so huge, but actually, per unit area, they're surprisingly low. Compare that to dense coastal mangroves. Mangroves massively outperform the open ocean. They act as absolute powerhouses of biomass generation, followed by temperate grasslands and lakes.
And finally, we've made it to Section 5, Ecosystem Change and Succession.
First off, it is super important to realize that ecosystems don't just hit a wall and stop. They bleed into one another in these highly dynamic boundary zones called ecotones. A perfect example is that highly productive mangrove forest we just talked about. It's an ecotone sitting right between the marine ocean zone and the terrestrial land zone. Because these ecotones blend the resources of two totally different areas, they often host a massive density of unique species, which ecologists call the edge effect.
So the key takeaway here is that these landscapes, these borders, and these ecosystems are never static. Never. They are constantly marching forward, developing and changing through a beautifully predictable process called ecological succession.
Let's look at primary succession. Imagine a brand new volcanic island formed from newly cooled lava, or an area of bare rock left behind by a retreating glacier. Literally zero life. The timeline starts with a pioneer community, incredibly tough organisms like lichens and mosses that are the very first to colonize that barren rock. Over centuries, they break down the rock into soil, paving the way for larger plants, until finally, the area reaches a stable, balanced, moderately moist habitat known as a mesic condition. What is truly mind-blowing about this progression is that nature basically always aims for the middle. Hydraulic succession happens in super wet areas, like a pond slowly filling with sediment and plant life. Xerox succession starts in bone-dry areas, like a desert or bare rock. Yet, whether an environment starts out as waterlogged or completely dry, nature's incredible biological engineering constantly drives both extremes toward the exact same stable, moderate moisture middle ground. When you pull back and look at this whole progression, you really see the big picture. From completely empty rock in primary succession to the much faster recovery of secondary succession after something like a fire or farming destroys a landscape, right up to a beautifully balanced climax community. It really shows how the abiotic and biotic factors we discussed at the very beginning work together over time to carve out these distinct ecological niches. Which really leaves us with one final thought to ponder. We've seen how perfectly structured nature is, from the microscopic stomata of a desert cactus to the inverted pyramids of parasites, all the way to the relentless march of succession turning rock into a forest. So if the natural world is this self-balancing equation perfectly designed to build life from literally nothing,
How does our own species fit into this delicate balance? Are we just acting as a catastrophic disruption to this web of life? Or can we actually learn to be the ultimate protectors of this incredible progression? Definitely something to think about as you step outside today.